The sun hung low in the sky, casting long amber shadows across the dry earth. Dust clung to everything: the broken fence rails, the warped porch, the brittle stalks of grass gasping for water. It was the kind of quiet that didn't feel peaceful. It felt tired. A lone rider emerged from the far trail, his silhouette cutting against the orange sky. The horse beneath him, a worn chestnut gelding, limped slightly but trudged on with the kind of loyalty only years could forge. The man was tall in the saddle, his hat shadowing eyes that had seen too much. His coat was frayed at the hem, his boots layered with the miles of desert dust. A rifle sat sheathed beside his saddlebag, and a locket hung from his neck hidden beneath his shirt like a prayer only the wind knew. His name was Luke Callahan, and for 11 years he'd wandered from the Dakota Plains to the New Mexico ridges, from saloons and empty church pews to graveyards where names no longer meant anything. All he had was a faded photograph, a wedding ring in his pocket, and a memory that never dulled: Clara. She was his everything, his wildflower bride, his reason for breathing. And she was gone, or so they told him. He was left for dead after the border skirmish. The wagon they'd traveled in overturned. Bodies burned, tracks lost in the flood. The rescuers who found him said no woman survived. But in his heart, Luke never believed it. She was alive. She had to be. And now, the map he bought off a blind trader pointed to this place, this tired ranch on the edge of nowhere. The name scribbled on the corner of the envelope was almost unreadable, but it said what he'd held on to for years: Clara Rose. The gates of the ranch groaned as he pushed them open. 2 young figures, barely taller than the fence posts, peeked. From behind the porch, a boy and a girl, freckled, barefoot, worried. Luke pulled his horse to a stop, tipping his hat gently. "Afternoon, young'uns," he said, voice rough from weeks of silence. The children didn't answer. The boy stepped in front of the girl, a protective gesture too practiced for his age. Luke dismounted slowly, keeping his hands visible. "I ain't here to cause trouble. Just looking for a sip of water, and maybe someone named Clara Rose." The little girl's lip trembled. Her eyes welled up with tears. She clutched her brother's shirt. "Please don't take our mama." The boy stood taller. "She don't go nowhere with strangers," he said, his voice cracked but firm. Luke's throat tightened. That name, that voice. His heart thundered in his chest. "I ain't gonna take her, son," he said quietly. I'm just looking." The creak of the door behind them cut the silence. And then she stepped out. At first glance, she wasn't the same woman. Not the girl he'd married beneath the wild oaks of Tennessee. Her golden hair was tied back with a leather strap streaked with gray. Her face was lined with years of hardship and sun. She wore a worn apron over her dress, boots too big for her feet. But her eyes, Lord, her eyes. They were the color of a storm-swept sea. The same eyes that had once looked at him beneath lantern light and whispered, "Come back to me." She didn't recognize him. He didn't speak. The world stopped turning for a moment. Clara glanced at the children, then the man. Her hand moved slowly to the rifle that hung by the doorframe. "You lost, mister?" she asked flatly. Luke swallowed. "Might be," he said. "Was hoping I'd found Clara Rose." Her shoulders stiffened. "That's my name." The weight of those words nearly dropped Luke to his knees. "I'm Luke," he offered. "Luke Carter. Just passing through. Looking for a little rest for me and my horse. I'll pay?" She eyed him suspiciously. "We don't take to strangers real easy. I understand," he said. "Can sleep in the barn. Ain't a skin?" "4 more." The boy whispered something to her. Clara glanced at Luke again, hesitated, then nodded. "Barn's out back," she said. "There's water in the trough." Luke tipped his hat. "Much obliged." He turned without another word, leading his horse toward the barn. The children watched him go, still holding hands. Inside the barn, the air was thick with hay, silence, and ghosts. Luke leaned against the stall, pulling the locket from beneath his shirt. He opened it. Two faces smiled back, his and Clara's taken the day they married. She wore a blue dress, and he wore a suit borrowed from the preacher. Kept his name. That meant something. From the loft above, an owl hooted softly. Wind rustled through a hole in the roof. Luke closed his eyes. She was alive, and she didn't know him. Back in the house, Clara stood at the sink, staring out the window. The boy, Thomas, watched her. "Mama, who was that man?" "I don't know," she whispered. "He looked at you funny." Clara's hands trembled. "He's just a traveler." "But Mama," the little girl said, "he had the same eyes as me." Clara froze. She remembered once, long ago, a man had held her hand and said, "Our daughter will have your eyes and my stubborn heart." She had told herself that Dream had died, that her husband was gone, that the fire had taken everything. But something about that stranger, the way he said her name. That night, long after the children slept, Clara stood on the porch with her rifle in hand. The barn was still, but inside, Luke was wide awake, staring at the stars through the rafters. Remembered how he used to whisper to the sky. Like the stars could carry his hopes. She had named her son Thomas Luke. She told herself it was a coincidence, but deep down, a part of her knew. And in the barn, Luke whispered into the night air, "Clara, I'm home." He didn't know how yet, didn't know what he'd say, but he'd found her, and come morning, he'd face the truth, even if she didn't remember the cowboy who once promised her forever. Morning broke over the plains like a gentle sigh, quiet, golden, and soft with dew. Chickens clucked near the coop. The wind carried the scent of sun-warmed earth and aging pine. Clara stood at the stove, flipping cornbread on a cast-iron skillet. Her mind, however, wasn't on breakfast. It was on the stranger in the barn, on the way he'd said her name, on the look in his eyes when he saw the children. Thomas and Lily sat at the table, still rubbing sleep from their eyes. Clara watched them closely. Lily had that dreamy, far-off look she always got after waking from a strange dream. "Mama," Lily whispered, "did you dream of the man too?" Clara stiffened. "What man?" "The one with the horse." He looked sad, but his eyes were kind. Clara turned back to the skillet quickly, blinking away the sting in her eyes. "He's just passing through, sweetheart." "But he talked like he knew you." Clara didn't answer. She plated the cornbread and kissed the top of her daughter's head. Out in the barn, Luke had already been up for hours. He'd mucked out the stalls, checked the fence line, and even repaired the broken hinge on the chicken coop. The work helped. Work always helped when feelings were too big to carry. But nothing dulled the image of Clara's face standing on that porch. He couldn't shake it. She was alive. He had found her, but she didn't remember him. Or worse, she remembered and didn't want to remember. His stomach turned. He heard footsteps. Clara stood in the doorway of the barn, arms folded, watching him. "Been busy this morning," she said, not unkindly. He turned, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Hope you don't mind." "That co-op was hanging on by a prayer," she nodded. "Thank you." Silence. Then she said, "You said you were looking for me yesterday." "Why?" Luke hesitated. "I'd heard a name." Clara rose, was just following a trail. She tilted her head. "Lots of Claras. And Rose ain't that rare." He smiled gently. It was the way it was written. Looked like a name someone was trying not to forget. That made her pause. "You ever know a man named Luke Callahan?" He asked softly. Clara's breath caught. She swallowed hard, eyes darting away. "I knew someone once," she said. "Long time ago." Luke's heart ached. "What happened?" She stared off toward the fields, voice low. "There was a raid." Bandits hit the wagon train we were on. Fire everywhere. Screamin'. I was thrown from the wagon. I never saw. Him again. Luke's throat tightened. And you thought he was dead? I didn't think. I knew. There was nothing left. Just ash and wind. Her voice cracked. I waited for weeks. No sign. Eventually, I had to live. He wanted to reach for her, tell her everything. But something in her voice, something brittle, stopped him. Instead, he said, I lost someone in a fire once too. Clara looked at him, her eyes softening. What was her name? He smiled faintly. Clara. A long pause. Clara's lips parted, but she said nothing. Then she turned away. You're welcome to stay a while. You're good with tools, and we could use the help. Luke nodded slowly. Appreciate that. Over the next few days, Luke became part of the rhythm of the ranch. He fixed the broken water pump, helped Thomas with his reading, taught Lily how to ride his horse Jasper, who was as gentle as spring rain. The children took to him quickly. Lily would braid little daisies into his hat when he wasn't looking. Thomas followed him like a shadow, asking questions about guns, horses, and the stars. Clara watched from the porch sometimes, hands on her hips, her face unreadable. One evening, Luke found Thomas sitting alone under the old oak. You all right, kid? He asked. Thomas looked up. You remind me of someone from Mama's stories. Luke sat beside him. That so? She used to talk about this cowboy who rode a white horse and played the harmonica. Luke chuckled. I don't play no harmonica. But you have the eyes she described, sharp like a hawk, blue like the sky after a storm. Luke looked away, emotion tightening in his chest. She says he died, Thomas added. Luke was quiet. But Mama cries at night when she thinks we're sleepin'. Luke stared at the horizon. Maybe not all the dead stay dead. That night, Clara sat by the fire, sewing Lily's torn dress. Luke sat across the room, pretending to read. The crackle of the fire filled the silence. I never remarried, she said suddenly. Luke looked up. Plenty of men tried. But I couldn't let go. Luke's voice was barely a whisper. You don't have to. She met his eyes across the fire. I don't know who you are, but it's like you walked out of a dream I tried to forget. He rose slowly, walked to the mantel, and pulled something from his pocket, a ring. He held it out. Clara stared at it, tears blooming in her eyes. Where did you get this? I gave it to my wife the day we married, he said. Beneath a tree with a swing in her daddy's backyard. She covered her mouth, her knees buckled. He caught her. It's you, she whispered. Luke. Tears rolled down both their cheeks as they held onto each other, years of grief breaking like a dam. But how? She asked, clinging to his shirt. They said you died. I nearly did, he said. But something kept me alive. You. I've searched for you ever since. She sobbed into his chest. The children woke to the sound of their mothers crying. But it wasn't the lonely kind. It was the sound of coming home. The morning sun crept slowly over the hills, lighting the Callahan ranch with gold and rose. But it wasn't just another sunrise, it was a beginning. A second chance neither of them ever thought they'd get. Inside the kitchen, Clara stood. At the table, her fingers wrapped tightly around a chipped porcelain cup. Her eyes were puffy from the night before, tears of joy, disbelief, and aching memory. Across from her sat Luke, hands calloused and strong, but trembling just the same. Neither knew what to say. The children played outside, unaware of the full weight of what had just happened, unaware that the man helping with the barn repairs wasn't just a kind stranger. He was their father. Clara looked at him finally, her voice a breath. Why didn't you tell me the moment you saw me? Luke gave a sad smile. Because I wasn't sure you'd want me to. After all these years, after all this time, I didn't know if you'd moved on. Married again. Built a life without me. You had every right. Clara looked down. I didn't. I couldn't. I tried to forget you. But every time I looked into Thomas's eyes, I saw yours. And when Lily smiled, I saw mine. Luke leaned forward, his voice soft. They're perfect. You raised them well, Clara. You kept them safe. I tried. She swallowed thickly. But I never told them the truth. I told them their father was a hero, that he died protecting us. I didn't want them growing up wondering what happened. Luke nodded slowly. You did the right thing. A silence hung between them again, one full of memories, unsaid feelings, and years they could never get back. Later that day, Clara took Luke into the small attic. She pulled open a faded wooden chest with trembling hands. Inside were keepsake scraps of the life they'd shared, a pressed flower from their wedding bouquet, a yellowing handkerchief embroidered with his initials, and a worn envelope holding the only photo they'd ever taken together. And folded carefully beneath it all a marriage certificate, stained and faded, but whole. Luke picked it up like it was sacred scripture. You kept it all? He whispered. Every bit, she said. It was the only proof I had that it all really happened, that I hadn't dreamed you. His eyes burned. I carried this, he said, holding out the locket that had never left his neck. Every day, through war, through blizzards, through hell. Clara stepped forward and touched it gently. Her fingers brushed his skin. Something in the air shifted like time had bent to give them this impossible reunion. I never stopped loving you, she whispered. Luke took her hand. Then let me come home again. Let me make up for every minute we lost. But the past always leaves shadows. That evening, a storm rolled in gray clouds, swallowing the sky. Thunder rumbled like distant cannon fire, and lightning danced far. Beyond the hills, Luke helped Thomas bring the horses into the barn. Lily clung to Clara's leg as wind whipped through the fields. By nightfall, the rain fell in sheets, soaking the earth, drenching the world in memory and mud. Inside the barn, Luke worked by lantern light, patching leaks in the roof and securing the tools. But his mind wandered. He remembered the last time a storm came like this years ago, when the wagon train was attacked. Fire, smoke, screams. He remembered reaching for Clara, only to see her carriage swallowed by a flash of flame. The last thing he saw before collapsing was the locket falling from her hand. He'd spent 11 years trying to rewrite that moment. And now he was here. As the storm raged, Clara lit candles throughout the house. She paused by the children's room and watched them sleep, Thomas curled like a pup under a quilt, Lily clutching a stuffed cloth rabbit. She stepped quietly into the kitchen, where Luke sat drying off by the fire. He glanced up. They asleep? She nodded. Too many questions today wore them out. Luke smiled. They're good kids, smart, brave. Clara sat beside him. Thomas already adores you. And Lily, she keeps asking if you're staying forever. Luke's throat tightened. I want to, if you'll have me. The fire crackled. She looked at him, eyes shining with unspoken love. I want to tell them everything, but I don't know how. Luke nodded. Then we tell them together. But even in peace, trouble brews in the shadows. Out beyond the ranch, in the saloon on the edge of town, a man in a worn leather duster leaned against the bar. His name was Sheriff Malden, a man who once tried to make Clara his wife when she first arrived in the valley, pregnant and alone. He hadn't taken rejection well. When word reached him that a stranger was staying at Clara Rose's ranch, a man fixing her fences, eating at her table, and playing father to her children, he felt the old fire rise again. He slammed his glass on the counter. Find out who he is, he growled to the bartender. And if he's who I think he is, he ain't staying. Back at the ranch, the storm quieted to a soft drizzle. Luke stood at the window, watching the rain roll down the glass like tears. Clara joined him, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. "You okay?" He nodded. "Just thinking how different things could have been if I'd come home sooner." "You came when you could," she said gently. "That's all that matters now." He turned to her, eyes searching. "You really believe that?" She took his hand, placing it over her heart. "You were my husband then. You still are now. What matters is that we're standing here, together." He bent his head and kissed her forehead. Outside, the rain fell softer. Inside, something broken was beginning to heal. The storm passed by morning, leaving behind soaked earth, broken branches, and the fresh scent of rain-soaked grass. Birds began to chirp again as if nothing had changed, but everything had. Luke Callahan now sat where he belonged at the family table. For the first time in over a decade, Clara poured him coffee in her kitchen, and the children, still unaware of the truth, giggled around him like he'd always been there. Thomas jabbered on about building a treehouse. Lily told Luke she wanted to name a horse after him Sir Cowboy. She'd decided. Clara just smiled, watching them, her heart full and fragile at once. Later that afternoon, the family worked together repairing the barn's roof. Luke lifted Thomas onto the rafters while Clara steadied the ladder. Lily gathered loose nails and kept her hands busy braiding flowers. It all felt too perfect, like a fragile dream that could shatter if someone spoke too loudly. That evening, the sky turned lavender and gold. As the last light fell over the plains, Luke saddled up Jasper and invited Thomas and Lily for a ride to the ridge. They galloped up the hill laughing, their joy echoing in the quiet valley. At the top, they dismounted and sat in the tall grass, staring at the world from above. Below, their ranch looked small, like something in a snow globe, safe, warm, a place people returned to. Luke cleared his throat. "Y'all ever wonder about your pa?" he asked softly. Thomas nodded slowly. "Mama said he died in a fire when we were little." Lily clutched her knees. "She never says his name." Luke looked at them, both his children. "His own blood. Would you want to know who he was?" Thomas blinked. "Do you know?" "I might," Luke said, voice trembling. Lily whispered, "Was he like you?" Luke smiled. "I hope so." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small object wrapped in cloth. He handed it to Thomas. Inside was the wedding locket. Thomas opened it carefully, and both children leaned in. Inside was a tiny photograph of a man and a woman. Thomas frowned. "That's Mama." Lily gasped. "And that's you?" Luke's eyes welled. "It's me. Your mama and I, we were married long before either of you were born. My name is Luke Callahan, and I didn't die." The wind picked up around them. A quiet hush fell. "I was hurt, lost, but I never stopped looking. Never gave up hope that one day I'd see her again, see you." Thomas stared at him, brows furrowed. "You're our real pa?" Luke nodded, afraid of the answer. Lily flung herself into his arms first. Thomas took longer, but finally stepped forward, placing the locket back in Luke's palm with care. "I think I always knew." Luke pulled them both close, voice cracking. "I love you. I always have. Even when I didn't know your names, I loved you." Back at the house, Clara waited on the porch, rocking gently. When she saw them return and saw the locket in Thomas's hand, her eyes filled with tears. "They know," Luke said softly, lifting Lily down from the saddle. Clara rose and gathered them both into her arms. "My babies." Thomas looked up. "Why didn't you tell?" "You us?" Clara smoothed his hair. "Because I thought your daddy was gone. I didn't want you growing up with sadness and questions I couldn't answer." Lily whispered, "But he's here now." Clara met Luke's gaze. "Yes, he is." That night they sat by the fire together. A real family. They told stories, shared memories, and laughed like nothing had ever been broken. But peace was a Short ride ahead of trouble. The next morning, hoofbeats thundered down the path. Dust curled in the air. Sheriff Malden and 3 of his men rode up to the gate, guns holstered. Expressions grim. Luke and Clara stood side by side as the sheriff dismounted. "Well, well," Malden drawled. "Didn't expect to see you here, Callahan." Luke's eyes narrowed. "You know me?" "Oh, I know you. Bounty hunter turned deserter. Got a price on your head in 3 states. I was real surprised to hear you showed up here." Clara stepped forward. "This is my husband. This is his home." Malden smirked. "That so? He's still got warrants on him." "Unless he's got a pardon, he's coming with me." Luke's jaw clenched. Those charges were false. Made by a marshal who took bribes. "You got proof of that?" "No." "Then I'm tacking you in." Clara moved between them. "You're not taking him." Malden raised an eyebrow. "You'd stand in my way? After all I did for you back when you showed up here with nothing? You offered to help," she spat. "Then tried to buy my hand like it was cattle. I said no then, and I'm saying no now." Malden stepped closer. "You better think real hard, Clara." Luke stepped forward. "This isn't about justice. This is about you wanting what you couldn't have." Malden's jaw twitched. "I'm not going anywhere," Luke said. "You want a fight? You'll get one. But you won't win." Behind him, Thomas came to stand beside his father. Then Lily, gripping Clara's hand. "A family together." Clara raised her voice. "This man is a father, a husband. This is his land. You come after him. You come through all of us." The tension thickened. Malden looked at the children, at Clara, at the rifle on the porch. He grunted, spitting in the dirt. "This ain't over." He mounted his horse. "You bought yourself time, Callahan. But the past don't forget." Then he rode off with his men in a trail of dust. Later that night, Clara sat on the porch beside Luke, a rifle across her lap. "I won't lose you again," she said. "You won't," Luke replied. The moon rose full and bright above them, casting silver light across the ranch. Inside, the children slept peacefully, for the first time knowing the man in the barn wasn't a stranger. He was their father, and he wasn't going anywhere. The morning came uneasy. The skies were blue, the breeze soft, but something in the wind had shifted. Clara felt it in her bones as she poured coffee into 2 cups, one for her, one for Luke, like she'd done every morning since he returned. Luke stood at the window, watching the fence line. He'd been quiet since the sheriff's visit, eyes sharp, back stiff with tension. He didn't need to say it aloud. He knew what was coming. Clara knew it too. The past hadn't just come knocking, it had pulled up a chair and set itself on fire. "Do you think he'll come back?" Clara asked, keeping her voice steady. Luke took a sip and didn't answer right away. "He's not the kind to bluff," Luke finally said. "He's the kind who shows up with 2 rifles and no warning." Clara's eyes narrowed. "Then let's not wait to be surprised." The family worked fast. Clara loaded bullets. Luke checked and cleaned both rifles, and his old revolver kept packed away in an oiled cloth for years, but still deadly as a rattlesnake. Thomas, already growing into his father's walk, helped with the livestock, securing gates and dragging logs to reinforce the back fence. Lily followed him with a toy pistol on her belt, chin held high. But there was fear too thick and quiet, like thunder in the distance. They weren't just preparing to protect land. They were preparing to defend the family they'd finally become. That evening, a rider came. An old friend of Luke's, Elias Boone, a wiry man with a scar running down his left cheek and a laugh louder than a church bell. He rode in like he was still 20 and bulletproof, though his beard had more silver than smoke. "Luke Callahan." "You old ghost," Elias said, dismounting and grabbing Luke in a hug. "I heard you were alive, but I didn't believe it until I got your wire." Luke smiled for the first time in days. Didn't think you'd ride all this way. Figured if you were finally settling down, you'd need someone to watch your back. Clara stepped out onto the porch, Lily in her arms. Elias tipped his hat. Ma'am. You must be the miracle Luke spent half his life searching for. Clara smiled warmly. And you must be the friend who used to teach him how to cheat at poker, Elias laughed. That too. Night fell heavy. The ranch lay quiet, but no one slept soundly. Clara sat beside Luke in the dark, shotgun across her knees. Elias patrolled the fence line with a lantern and a 6-dash shooter. Inside, Thomas lay beside his sister in the same bed. Are we gonna be okay? Lily asked, her voice trembling. Thomas didn't answer at first. Then he whispered, Pa's not gonna let anything happen. And they believed it, because love, when it's real, makes even a frightened heart brave. The attack came just before dawn. Malden returned, as promised, this time with 5 men and enough firepower to make a statement. Didn't knock out. The first bullet shattered a window. Clara rushed to the children's room, shielding them with her body. Luke rolled off the cot, grabbed his revolver, and kicked the front door open. Gunfire cracked the morning silence. Dirt flew from the front yard as bullets struck posts, barrels, and the barn wall. Elias returned fire from the hayloft, picking off one of Malden's men who tried to circle around the back. Luke ducked behind the well wall, fired twice, and hit another man in the shoulder. Screams echoed through the valley. You're trespassing on my land, Luke shouted. Leave. Now and no one else gets hurt. Malden stepped from behind his horse, rifle in hand. This land belongs to the county now, he shouted back. You don't get to come back from the dead and play king, Callahan. Luke's voice boomed. I ain't king. I'm a father, a husband. And you're a coward with a badge. Malden fired and missed. Luke returned with a shot that grazed the sheriff's leg, knocking him off balance. Inside the house, Clara ushered the children into the cellar hatch beneath the floorboards. Stay quiet, she whispered, and don't come out unless I say. She climbed back up, loaded her shotgun, and took her position beside the front door. Luke met her eyes across the entryway. I've got your back, she said, and I've got yours. The shootout lasted 20 minutes. Felt like hours. When the smoke finally cleared, 3 of Malden's men were injured, 1 had fled, and Elias stood victorious over the last hands tied and rifle tossed aside. Malden bled from his shoulder and thigh, crawling behind a broken wagon for cover. Luke approached slowly, revolver in hand. You done? Malden spat blood. You think you've won? I don't need to win, Luke said. I just needed to come home. He holstered his gun, turned to Clara, and gave a subtle nod. Sheriff Malden was arrested 2 days later by state marshals, thanks to Elias, who delivered a thick envelope of evidence from Luke's bounty days, proving the corruption and falsified charges Malden had relied on to control the region. Justice didn't come fast in the West, but when it came, it stayed. That evening, the ranch was quiet again. Chickens pecked lazily in the dirt. Smoke rose gently from the chimney. Clara swept broken glass from the kitchen floor. Thomas helped Elias load the wagon. You leaving already? The boy asked. Elias smiled. Your pa's got things handled now. I reckon it's time I found some peace of my own. He looked at Luke and Clara, standing side by side, their hands entwined. You two don't need a gunslinger anymore. You've got each other. That night, Clara and Luke sat on the porch swing under a blanket of stars. I thought I'd lost you forever, Clara said softly. You never did, Luke replied. I just took a long road home. She rested her head on his shoulder. Do you think it's really over? Luke looked out over the fields, where fireflies danced and wind whispered through the tall grass. I think we've earned our peace. From inside, the sound of laughter echoed. Thomas and Lily playing a card game by lamplight. Luke smiled. He had found what he'd searched for all those years, and now he'd protect it with every last breath in him. Weeks passed since the firefight that echoed across the valley. The old ranch, scarred and blackened in places, breathed again restored by hands that had suffered but never surrendered. Clara patched the barn roof with Thomas. Lily swept the porch and giggled every time she caught the chickens chasing each other. Luke built a new corral with fresh timber and Elias's tools, now left behind. But most of all, peace returned, not the kind that comes from quiet, but the kind that lives in the hearts of those who have faced storm and fire and still choose to stay. One chilly morning, Clara stood in the doorway with her apron fluttering in the wind, watching Luke work in the field. He was sawing a plank in half, shirt damp with sweat, humming an old tune from the trail. She smiled, not at what he was doing, but at who he had become again. No longer just the drifter. No longer a name whispered in bounty ledgers. Now he was husband, father, home. Lily tugged at Clara's skirt, holding a drawing. Look, Mama, I made this. It was a picture stick figures beneath a sun, a dog, 2 horses, a tree. 4 people stood smiling. Clara crouched, taking it gently. Who are these? Lily beamed. That's me. That's Thomas. That's you, and that's Pa. Her voice was clear and sure. Clara's throat tightened. That's beautiful, sweetheart. Lily skipped away, leaving Clara blinking back tears. Later. That evening, after dinner, the family sat by the fireplace. Lily curled in Clara's lap, eyes fluttering closed. Thomas sat cross-legged near the hearth, whittling a toy horse. Luke rocked gently in the old wooden chair, arms crossed, watching. Then, with quiet awe, no one spoke for a while, and then Thomas cleared his throat. Pa? Luke raised a brow. He still wasn't used to the word. It hit him like a song every time. Yes, son? Will you tell us about where you were? About why you left? Clara tensed, just a little. Luke set the chair still. He looked at the
fire, then at the boy. I reckon I owe you that.
He leaned forward, voice low, not shaky but real. I was young and stupid once. Thought a man had to fight his way through the world with his fists and his pride. I went looking for justice. Wound up running from it. Got caught in something bigger than I knew how to fix. He glanced at Clara. I wrote letters. Every week. I never knew they weren't reaching her. I thought she hated me. Until I came back and saw you both. Thomas said nothing. His hand stilled on the carving. I should have come sooner, Luke finished. But I promise you now I ain't ever leaving again. The room was still. Then Thomas stood, walked across the floor, and handed Luke the carved horse. For you, he said. Luke took it carefully. Thank you, son. The boy looked into his eyes. You're home now, Pa. Luke didn't answer. He just pulled his boy into a hug. Spring rolled. In, slow and golden, flowers bloomed along the fence. A new foal kicked its way into the world in the north pasture. The well was repaired, the roof patched, and in the warm afternoons, Clara and Luke would walk the land hand in hand, their shadows long and joined behind them. On Sundays, they rode into town together, Thomas on his own horse now, Lily giggling from the back of Luke's saddle. The townsfolk, once wary, now tipped their hats in respect. Word of Sheriff Malden's fall had spread far. Some came to shake Luke's hand. Others just nodded quietly. Grateful for the change. At the general store, Lily picked out ribbons. At the church, Clara sang again. Luke, for the first time in decades, sat in the pew without shame or fear. The past hadn't disappeared. It never would. But it no longer owned them. They'd wrestled it into the ground and planted seeds on top. One afternoon, Clara found a box on the porch. Inside it, her old letters unopened. Hundreds of them, bound in twine, sent years ago. All returned now, anonymously. Clara sat on the porch swing, holding them in her lap. she didn't cry. She just held them, like old bones of a ghost finally buried. Luke came out, saw the box, and sat beside her. "I thought you should have them," he said quietly, "even if it's late." She leaned into him, resting her head against his chest. "It's not late," she whispered. "It's just in time. Years would pass, the ranch would grow. So would Thomas, and Lily. Luke would hang up his revolver for good and teach his children not how to fight, but how to stand, how to love, how to forgive. One day, Thomas would marry the daughter of a nearby rancher, and Clara would cry as she baked 4 pies for the wedding supper. Lily would grow wild and strong, a rider before 10 and a sharp-tongued defender of stray. Animals. And Clara and Luke would sit beneath the cottonwood tree, watching it all unfold, fingers always entwined. But this moment, right now? The fire crackled. The family laughed over supper. Lily poured too much gravy on her potatoes. Thomas groaned. Clara chuckled. Luke reached for her hand under the table and squeezed it, and nothing in the world, not war or loss or years of silence, could ever take this from them again, because the family had been broken, scattered, nearly lost, but love had brought them back, and when the children cried, "Please don't take our mama," they hadn't known, they hadn't seen that the man at the door was their pa returned by, fate forgiven by time, and home at last.